My name is Mary Conquest. I'm your host for Safety Labs, the podcast where we explore the human side of safety to support safety professionals. We move past regulations and reportables to talk about the core skills of safety leadership: empathy, influence, trust, rapport. In other words, the soft skills that help you do the hard stuff. This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Hi there. Welcome to Safety Labs. Our guest today is no stranger to longtime podcast listeners. Last time we spoke, in April of 2023, we talked about learning from normal work. Since then, some things in the world have changed significantly and some not at all. And in terms of new things, I'm talking about what some are terming the AI revolution. In terms of old things, I'm referring to human-centered approaches to safety. Humans are, after all, still at the center of everything we do. Today, we'll talk about our guests' experience operationalizing HOP approaches using AI tools in an ethical and human-centered way. Brent Sutton works in the commercial, government, and education sectors to address health and safety risks and improve organizational learning. He has over 20 years' experience in various OHS roles. He's currently the architect of several alternative sentencing projects. He's a safety coach, helping organizations see workers as a solution. Brent guides teams integrating worker engagement and participation into existing health and safety systems to improve operations. He's the lead author of 3 Amazon best-selling safety books, all exploring different aspects of learning teams. And Brent joins us from Auckland. Welcome.
Welcome, Mary. Thanks for having me back.
So let's start with your definition or description of HOP. And that's both for those who maybe haven't heard of it, although it's pretty prevalent, and also in a way to explain your perception of its value in the safety world.
Sure. I think once again, from my perspective, human and organizational performance, or commonly known as HOP, is really about understanding how humans operate within systems and how organizations create the environment or the conditions for that work to go well, rather than focusing on why work doesn't go well.
Right. Okay. So, and that's what we talked about before, is learning from normal was the last podcast. So how do you think HOP's positioning in the safety industry, I'm not going to say has changed from the date we last spoke, but over the past 5 years, have safety professionals by and large changed the way they look at HOP?
Yes. I mean, like everything, people explore HOP for a number of different reasons. There are those that could well be what I call chasing the shiniest toy. There'll be those that have realized that their current approach has reached its plateau, and they're looking to try and do safety differently to sort of really go into that next component. And then for many people have begun to understand the value of actually learning, because the reality is, I think this year is the 100th year of continuous improvement. So since the work, with the work of people like Deming and other great people like Stewart, and at the end of the day, the whole idea of this notion that there's going to be a gap between works imagined and work is done is always going to exist. And more people are now beginning to lean into that. Rather than treating those two things as being bad, they're now leaning into it and saying, how can we learn as an organization? But more importantly, how can we improve as an organization by leaning into that? So I think that's a lot of trend that we're seeing at the moment in the work that I do in particular. But HOP doesn't replace existing systems.
Yes. It's more of an approach that integrates into existing systems.
Yeah, look, it's 5 principles. And I'm always fascinated by how many people get wound up about it, because it's just 5 basic principles.
Is there anything that you believed strongly about HOP, sort of when you were first introduced to it, that you now might either revise or add a little bit of nuance to?
Oh, well, the short answer, there has to be, because if there's not, I haven't learned. So I think there's 2 things. There's what stayed strong with me, and for me, the focus has always been about the frontline people, about the whole worker engagement component, and that hasn't changed. And in actual fact, I've seen that get stronger. I've actually seen the value how workers have taken, whilst they don't necessarily buy into the HOP principles, but the fact that using these operational learning tools, they're actually extending their knowledge, extending their understanding, looking at how they see risk. That, to me, is the most exciting component of it. What I have learnt is that things like learning teams are absolutely amazing to understand those deeper systemic issues that happen in organizations, but they're not a great tool for trying to look at generalized learning because, like everything else, they require people to come together. They require the organization to provide those resources. So where I was using learning teams then and where I'm using learning teams now has absolutely changed. But their value is very much in that deeper end of the market. Whereas some of the other tools that we use, things like the 4Ds and the 4Ls, they're really great to have those frontline conversations. And no surprise, Mary, that when I went to this as looking at it through the safety lens, organizations are using HOP primarily for operational lenses. So once again, why I shouldn't be surprised by that. So the uptake amongst people that do continuous improvement, the uptake amongst people that do lean or quality or food safety has been equally as impressive as the safety side.
That makes sense to me because they're primed in a way for that sort of learning, continuous improvement. Like, I don't know, that's my theory. I'm throwing it out there with zero knowledge of the situation.
Well, they're certainly, they are not having the same safety science debate that is being had in the safety market. Now, is that maturity? Who knows? But it's just really fascinating that the two sides are completely different. Like, organizations are working with this, they're used to doing what they call Gemba walks, which is this notion that leadership goes out to the front line to learn from the front line. A Gemba in Japanese means go to the mountain to learn. For them, they're using some of the HOP operational learning tools because they provide deeper context through storytelling that the traditional Gemba tools didn't. The engagement is the same.
Of the criticisms you hear regarding HOP, and I'm going to try and put it mostly in the safety on the safety side of things, which do you think are maybe most fair or at least understandable?
I think this notion that, I said all the time that HOP is based on a safety science. It's 5 principles. Now, how you operationalize HOP may well be based on a safety science. If I go back to the origins of HOP and HPI and HP, they're still using traditional tools today that other organizations use, things like process safety. All that they've done applying the HOP principles is to actually build on process safety. So at the moment, there appears to be, and in some circles, it's like, buy our religion or buy our robes because this is the best out there. Okay. And the reality is, it's just 5 principles. So whatever you do, as long as you look back and say, are we applying those 5 principles? Great. A classic one is you hear that HOP is about no blame. Okay. That's not factual. HOP basically says that blame doesn't change anything. How does blaming someone change the system? And people get confused the difference between accountability, being held to account, being responsible, and being culpable. So if a person knowingly does something wrong, knowing the consequence of doing it knowingly wrong, then that is reckless.
Yeah, and they're culpable in that situation.
Absolutely. So HOP has never said no blame, just as HOP has never said, zero harm is bad. Okay, because all those things are context-based. But what it's really saying is that, we need to build better systems, that things are always changing, that the people at the front line are the people that know the most about how the work is done. They're the ones that know most about whether controls work or don't work. If you just leaned in and listened to them, you could learn something.
So last time we spoke, not on the podcast, but when we were chatting before the show, you mentioned that you'd rather focus on let me try that word again, on operationalizing HOP than on debating about it in philosophical terms. So
Yes.
you also said that the mainstream wants tools, not philosophy. So I'm wondering if you can expand on that.
Yeah. So basically, as programs or products, whatever you want to call them, as they become mainstream, the needs of that audience are completely different to the early adopters. So the early adopters, by their nature, they're drawn into it because of its philosophy. They're drawn into basically its promise or its potential, but the mainstream don't. The mainstream are basically looking to how they can apply this to do better and to improve. And that mainstream are looking for tools to support that. They're least interested in the history. Makes sense? Because they've come to it because someone's already told them that it's helped them do something. So that's what the mainstream does. So they have a very different view around it. So as HOPs extended its market space, the need for people to operationalize it has become more important in that space. And that's where we've always played. So, we're less involved in the leadership end. We're more involved in the front end. How to help workers learn, how to help work groups learn, and ultimately how to help the organization to learn. Because shockingly, what workers learn and what the organization learns are completely different.
So we'll get back to our discussion in a minute, but first we're going to hear from the company behind the podcast, specifically about one of the most popular tools in their Slice brand. In construction and industrial manufacturing, traditional utility knives can be uncomfortable, they can be unsafe, and sometimes they wear out quickly. The Slice folding utility knife delivers power, control, and safety. It's a durable metal handle. It's quite heavy, built to withstand industrial use. It's an ergonomic design with a finger loop that gives you a more secure grip. And it also offers 2 locked positions. So this is sort of a standard locked position. And then for awkward angles, you can use it bent like this. There's a quick release lock here. I'm just pressing this little button and it's secure and convenient. If you would like to learn more about which tools will work for your materials, you can request free samples at safetylabspodcast.com/samples. And now back to our discussion.
Now, just a quick story for you actually about what you just done, Mary, because the last time I got sent a whole lot of free samples, which were amazing. And I was doing a piece of work with a client, and one of the stories that came up is that they had banned knives for opening boxes because of all the cuts. Okay. Yet cuts were still happening, but they'd banned knives. So this is really interesting. How could cuts happen if they've already banned knives? So I sent them some of the product I've been given. Amazing outcome. So I'm sharing that not to promote the product. I'm sharing it because that was a story. Because what we discovered is that workers were bringing in their own tools because they still had to use something to actually open the boxes. So now we gave them a product that has a retractable that doesn't cut skin. Okay. Their life changed.
I just want to make one probably legal thing. It can cut skin, but it's safe to the touch. So it's engineered.
Yes.
It certainly is not
Yeah.
the same. Like I'm touching the edge here. I would never do that with a standard utility knife.
But just the design, the ergonomic of it, their placement of their hand to where the cutting has completely changed.
Excellent. Well,
So
that's
change work design. So there we go. That's a real life experience.
Well, good to hear. And we love stories here. I'll be asking you for more as we continue. But right now I'm taking a bit of a turn into a little bit more about AI. So people love it. People hate it. There's not much in between. I imagine that you get some hesitancy from some people. How do you make the case to a client organization for using AI within safety programs? Like, what are the common objections and how do you respond to those?
Okay. Well, look, once again, it's a 2-letter word that can mean so much. and once again, just for the listeners out there, the first 20 years of my life was in information technology. So technically my first qualification was actually as a systems analyst. Okay. So one of my last roles, which was in 2001, was working with a large American organization around machine learning, which basically is AI. So for me, it hasn't really changed. I think the ability for people to access AI is the thing that's dramatically changed in that space. So what do I always hear? So the classic thing, obviously, when we're dealing with data, there's always issues around privacy. There are the classic cybersecurity components. There are the classic ones of hallucination and misinformation, which I find fascinating because as humans, when we share bad news, do we pad it out? Do we present it in a way that is palatable?
We do. Most of us do.
So, yeah, absolutely. Now, one couldn't call that a lie. One could maybe say it's a white lie, but one would say is that we're trying to present data in a way that is helpful. So why would AI be any different? So the question here is, you need to tell AI what is helpful. We need to, tell it, what the training is that does that. So I really find that all the things that people find bad in AI are the same things that humans do. Or this expectation that AI has to be better than humans. Well, AI isn't a human. It's just a large language model. I mean, and then we have the argument it's going to take people's jobs, okay? And I would look at that in two ways. If your job was writing policy, then I would say AI is going to be pretty good at taking that content and being able to write that policy far quicker than a human. I think the value in AI, and particularly what we're seeing, is its ability to look at lots of stories and lots of conversations and how to make sense of it and how to look for those weak signals, because humans by nature are biased. So even on this podcast, there'll be listeners who are only taking from this podcast what they want to hear. And there'll be elements that that's classic bias. Now, biases aren't bad. Many biases are subconscious by their nature. And what we can do with AI is we can tell it what bias we want it to use. And I think that's the value, because it learns better over time.
So in the context of human and operational performance and operations, what does ethical and human-centered AI look like in practice? So here I'm asking for a story.
Yeah.
How does it work?
Yeah. So the first thing, it's not there for surveillance. Okay. It's not there for monitoring. It's there to give us insights. I could be engaging with a bunch of workers, and they could be sharing their stories with me. Now, in those stories, there are going to be some things that, if you look at that transcript, could make the organization very uncomfortable. Now, the role of AI would be to produce that story in a way that is looking at from an organizational learning point of view, not as a physical transcript of what each person basically said. So if I was a leader and I was wanting to blame, I could read that transcript and say, that person wasn't following that rule, that person wasn't following that procedure, that person was bypassing something. That is weaponizing AI as a surveillance tool. I'm already seeing that unfolding with AI-empowered cameras or AI equipment on forklifts. So, for instance, we have an exclusion zone, and AI is going to tell you how many times the exclusion zone was breached. That's surveillance.
Yeah, that's a smarter, more frightening sort of, standard a safety manager with a clipboard being the safety police, really. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now it's just AI. And I've been involved in enough of those projects to also understand that AI generates quite a few false positives as well. What's more interesting is that knowing the presence or absence of the exclusion zone might be valuable, but what's even more valuable is engaging with the workers to hear their stories about why the exclusion zone doesn't work. So a combination of trending or insights from AI and then engagement with the humans for context, now we're talking benefit. Now we're talking value.
So you spoke to me before about recording conversations, like using AI to record conversations. So can you sort of lay out how that would fit into a safety manager's work?
Yeah, so look, a really good example could be is we use some devices that we don't sell, but they are a form of AI note taker, and they basically sit on the back of the phone, okay? And their job is just to listen, okay? And they're very good at listening, and they can capture a massive range, like 15, 20 meters of conversations that are happening. And for instance, we'd have a leader go out and they'd have this device with them. And the leader's role is to be curious. In this example, the leader would be using one of our 4Ds cards. So he'd be asking workers, when you're doing this task, share a story but it doesn't make sense or it frustrates you. Share a story where it's you're finding it risky or challenging. Share a story when you're finding it harder or more demanding, or share a story when you're finding it changing or surprising. And workers are going to share that story. Now, if that leader had a notebook with them and was having to write down what they're hearing, first of all, do you think he's actually, or he or she is going to actually write down what was physically said? Or are they going to write down what they heard?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're going to write down what they heard because they have to summarize, because you just can't keep up with a pen, right?
That is correct. Yeah. And what they're writing down is typically void of emotion, because if there's any emotional context, that's come from the listener who is judging it, not from what the worker is saying. But I could take these conversations and I could apply an AI lens across that, and across those stories, I can now identify insights. I could identify when negative sentiment was being applied by what people are saying. I can look at the positive sentiment, and I can do all those things, and I can present that data back to the group of workers and to that leader to have then some deeper conversations. That's where AI is powerful.
And at scale.
And at scale. So we recently did a project where the organization wanted leaders to ask better questions. So it's the old story, that's about skill building. So what happened was they were using these devices, and we would analyze all the leader conversations that were being had. And rather than edifying individual leaders, we basically fed back to the leaders that these were the types of questions that drew the best responses.
Instead of just telling them. Yeah.
The leaders looked at those responses. Yes. So once again, don't blame leaders. This is a story. Just if they can't, just because they're not able to ask a better question at the time, doesn't mean they don't have the capability. They're short on time. They're short on all these things. So we used the AI for two components. One, to help leaders see what types of questions are getting the best types of responses. And secondly, showing leaders not only what's wrong in the work, but also showing leaders what's right in the work. Because has anyone ever considered that we're actually psychologically harming leaders by only focusing on the bad?
I don't know. But it's...
Because we say, how do leaders respond to bad news? Well, why don't we also share within the stories that are the good news?
Yeah, it gives a more accurate picture.
Absolutely. And we did that experiment with a large banking institution where we captured, I think it was about 3,000 or 4,000 40 conversations across their network. And we presented that data back to them, both in this is where workers believe that the system is supporting work to go well, and this is where they believe that the system is hindering work to go well. That balance was amazing. They really appreciated it.
Well, so, okay, I want to, we touched on blame before, and how it can be misunderstood when people are talking about what HOP means and blame. What would you say to someone who's worried that AI will be used kind of at scale to blame and punish workers rather than to understand and improve work?
Well, I think that comes down to intent. So if your intention is to gather information to hold people to account, AI will just do it at scale. compared to you having a whole bunch of people out there finding the same problems. So the thing about humans, and I'm writing this as part of my new book, we're really good at weaponizing systems. We're really good at that. So as much as we do things for the betterment, it's also easy for us to turn it around. Yeah, it's just what we do.
So bringing that ethical, human-centered lens, how do you respectfully share AI-generated insights with workers without them feeling that, like, you're trying to offer them something useful, but it could be seen, depending on how it's presented, as you're just like presenting data about them? Have you encountered that challenge, or?
Yeah, well, that challenge does exist. The way that we change that is that when we're providing insights, we always include some takeouts from the conversation that have been redacted not to identify people and have been redacted of any harmful language. Because it's ironic that when we talk about things, there's a difference between what we say and how we say it. So if they're using a bit of salty language, let's call it salty language in the conversation, that's really vital in terms of us understanding the context of that conversation. But when we're presenting that back to the workers, back to the organization, we don't need to repeat that language. But what we can do is show them the context of it, because that keeps it real.
Of simply saying, like, we've identified this problem and people have really strong feelings about it, like that sort of thing?
Absolutely. So I think that's the power bit. What's really interesting is that giving workers that feedback loop actually closes the loop, because many times they're actually waiting for the organization to close the loop. And boy, you could be waiting a lifetime. So we call them self-improving teams. So by the AI supporting closing that loop actually helps people learn. And also the feedback from the AI is also a reflective practice as well. So once again, as the workers are talking or as the workers are hearing other conversations, there is learning going on and they may have missed some components. So that feedback loop actually helps them to see some things that they missed, but also might build on some of the things that they actually picked up. So I think it's a great learning tool.
Can you share a story of how AI helped reveal something about work that humans maybe weren't seeing and or they couldn't see at scale?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can think of one that we've actually published as part of an alternative sentencing, where basically this is dealing with a waste organisation in a landfill, and there were spasmodic reports of aggression between the people operating on the landfill and the truck drivers who were bringing the trucks in to basically discharge their load into the landfill. And as we ran through the project, those stories got amplified. So once again, because the organisation was struggling in how to listen, people were only raising the issue if it got really high. But soon as the workers understood that the organisation was listening, we obviously got a huge volume of those stories. Okay, so the actual frequency of that happening was extremely high.
So people spoke up more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
so the
more
organization's,
often. Yeah.
The organization's saying, it doesn't happen often. Well, then the workers are telling us it's actually happening 8 to 10 times a day. Okay. So as the workers were able to articulate better, as the workers were able to understand the nature of the work, what AI gave us was some really good insights. And what those insights then led to was that we then started to do some small little changes. Not big change, but small little changes. And here was the irony. Through the stories that they shared with us, we discovered that all the trucks would be in like a staging area. And that staging area, the truck drivers could see what was happening in the landfill area. And in this country, we encourage truck drivers never to reverse because reversing is dangerous. But on a landfill, you have to reverse. So guess what happens? People aren't great at reversing anymore. So truck drivers are watching other truck drivers not reversing properly. The truck drivers are then on their radio telephones, their RTs or their CBs, abusing the other truck drivers. You got the guy in the landfill trying to direct the truck. The driver's getting abuse from the other side. The landfill guy doesn't know what's going on. He starts getting abuse from the truck driver. Can you see the cycle? It all suddenly escalates. Okay. So all we did was we shifted the staging zone out of the line of sight.
So are you ever worried about, when they talk about hallucinations, are you worried about an insight being incorrect? Like I have an idea of how you could work around that, but I'm going to ask you.
Yeah. So once again, the insight comes from frequency of the pattern, not from the one-off. So when we're looking at data, we're looking at how these, Honagle calls them weak signals. We're looking at how these signals are clustering. So once again, we should be having the conversation about accuracy, because all these stories are about what the person believes and how the person feels at that time. But when those things cluster, then there has to be an element of fact to it. And because they cluster, that's the opportunity for the human, because remember, humans have to remain at the center of decision making. That's the opportunity for the safety person, for instance, now they've seen a pattern, is to go out and have a deeper conversation.
Has your perspective on AI changed over time? Obviously, there hasn't been that much time, but there kind of has, because as you said, none of this is actually new. It's just more accessible these days.
Yes, and the tools are more accessible. And just so I'm clear, 99% of all our work, we have always done it with Microsoft Copilot. So we've never said this is the best tool, okay? Because this stuff is changing at such a rapid rate that tools keep leapfrogging each other. But like, I love when I see people who are an AI expert. I don't know how you can be an expert in something that's always changing, okay? So that's why we don't call ourselves experts. We call ourselves more like we're advocating how to learn from operations. So from day one, we stuck with Microsoft, not because it's the best, because that's what corporates use. And Microsoft's implementation of their large language models are secure. That has its downsides. The downside is you need to train the tool, because just imagine that agent is like a toddler. So it means you need to write it tighter, but you also need to give it content to learn from. So I could have the same agent, exactly the same agent, running on two different organizations, and initially I'll get two very different responses. So that's what we've learned. We've learned through all this experience is that if you're going to create something to help people, you need to be able to train it.
If someone says, okay, we're interested in using AI, but we want to make sure that it's ethical and human-centered, what sort of practical advice, like how, it's a little bit abstract to me, like what makes it ethical and human-centered? Like, are there principles maybe that you can go, or questions you can ask yourself?
Yeah, well, on our website, we've put some of those principles up, shock horror, and they're very aligned with the HOP principles, but you could use the HOP principles. Are we using AI to learn, or are we using it to blame? All these things, that's what the ethical side is. The human-centered side is that we're there to understand the work and the conditions in the work. We're not there to understand human behavior. So the anti-human centered bit was that we're trying to catch people out.
Right. Which is a weaponization, as you've...
Yes, it is. It is a classic weaponization. We do that right now, Mary, with CCTV.
Yes, we do.
Okay. AI can just do it at scale.
Yeah, I was thinking about, you were talking about exclusion zones and using it in terms of surveillance. There could be also a human-centered way where it's just like, we've noticed that 80% of the breaches of exclusion zones happen between 3 and 4 p.m. What's going on? And it's not like, it's not to say, your team is terrible. You're always going.
So here's the interesting thing. You've used some really interesting language, breaches. So that assumes that the exclusion zone has high efficacy. So that assumes the exclusion zone has been designed well. We'd approach it differently. We'd basically say that we have discovered that between this time, that the ability of the exclusion zone to create safe work hasn't been as high as expected. And we want to learn about that. So we want to learn about how to make the exclusion zone capable of supporting work to go well. Because that's its entire job. Its job is to create safe work or safe design.
But then that pattern allows you to go and say, okay, who is on shift at this time? Let's go talk to them and see what's going on. Or if any of them are on shift at a different time, like what's different?
Yeah, and look, and I've had an organization where they've actually used the CCTV, but they've used it to have a conversation. So they said, hey, look, we've seen this change happen. Okay. We're doing a bit of review to make sure the exclusion zones still support work to go well. Here is some footage. We really want to get your input as to what didn't make sense at this time, what was challenging, what was demanding, so to extract the stories out of it. And that video was really useful in helping workers to do recall.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So once again, I thought that was a really powerful way. However, if you didn't open the conversation that we're there to learn, if you showed someone that video, that video showing actions without context, so that person could feel blame.
So one of the important ways to keep it human-centered is to contextualize the use of it, like why you're using it, how you're using it, and centering that in learning.
Absolutely. So always just imagine we start with the system in the center, humans around it. We're understanding how that exclusion zone is used every day. Okay. We want to understand, when does it support work? When does it hinder work? So we need all that rich context. And we're using a video to basically provide some of those examples so that people can reflect back and dig in a little bit deeper. Or I could print it off, put on a poster and say wanted. If you identify this person, we're paying a reward. Have you ever seen in the shops, the shoplifting photos of this person? Yes. Okay. That's purely blame.
If a listener could take one actionable step towards operationalizing HOP, and this is with or without AI tools, what would the most important first step be? Actually, let's ask it with tools and without tools. So without any tools, what would the most important step be?
Just being curious, asking people about work, asking people what happens every day. Okay, that's what just curious means. And we all have the capability of being curious. Okay. But curiosity starts with the work. Curiosity doesn't start with the person. So typically they're open questions, and they're questions that encourage people to share a story, not give an answer.
If someone was interested in bringing in HOP and using AI tools, where would you have them start? I'm guessing they still want to start with curiosity, but so I think for the purposes of the question, let's assume that they're already trying to operationalize HOP, and they would like now to implement maybe some of these AI tools. Where would you point them to start?
Yeah. So an example, these, and once again, we don't sell or support, but one of these AI note-taking devices is called Plaud, Plaud, and they're sold on Amazon and a few other locations. We actually provide some free tools on the Plaud community for safety that person who owns the Plaud can download for free, capture the conversation, and the Plaud will then do the analysis for them.
Okay. And so that's a trained LLM?
Yeah, it's a trained agent. It knows all about hallucination. It's been trained. It's been used thousands and thousands of times. And their total expenditure might be, I don't know, 160, 170 US for the device and free for the agent. What's the worst thing that's going to happen?
Yeah. I don't know.
You're going to learn. Well, because the agent Once again, the agent is going to listen to the conversation, listen to the questions that are being asked, and then process that and produce it in a particular way. So what I love about the use of AI note takers in particular is because your conversations no longer need to be structured. So your conversations can go in all different areas, but the agent will take that and produce the structure that you want. It's the old story. You're performing a JSA or some sort of pre-start process. You've got to follow the checklist. Okay, it's all changed. The whole idea is that you can have these broader conversations that happen. And that's what we've discovered, because I might be talking, I don't know, we might be on a construction site and there may have been a conversation about some of the tasks. But when they're talking about some of the equipment that they're using, they're jumping back saying, okay, but we can't use that equipment if we don't have this. Or we can't do this if we don't have that. All this pre-start stuff that we use is all based on being linear.
Yes, that's true.
Conversations and work aren't linear. So AI has that ability to take all those random conversations, all those little, think of it like a mind map, all those little branches that are going off, and take that and give it some structure.
In terms of some of the topics that we discussed today, so this is HOP, operationalizing it, AI tools, keeping things human-centered, even though we're using technology. Where would you focus training for the next generation of safety professionals, like on those topics or on one of them?
Look, that's a really good question, because ultimately all the stuff we've been talking about today is a soft skill, not a technical skill. So how do we help people build those soft skills? So the example is with an organization last week, and they thought that AI was some sort of coding or something. They thought it was, you need some sort of science degree. And I basically said to them that the products that we offer, we actually give you the actual content. You see the agent, you see all the intellectual property is there, because the objective is that you take that, you apply it, and you become curious and you tweak it over time. And when they looked at the agent, they said, "Oh, the agent is like a story." Yeah. Okay. There's no real coding as such. I mean, like a story, you have headings, you have subheadings. Okay. But at the end of the day, that's all it is. It's just telling a story. And they were really perplexed, because how it was pitched to them is, you need an expert, you need this and you need that.
So definitely not the technical skills, but maybe contextualizing the technology within.
Absolutely. And more the philosophy side. And I think for those people, so once again, very few people go to university to become a safety person. Okay. It's is them being able to challenge, them being more curious, them not accepting. So, I'm very fortunate. I get to lecture the diploma in safety in a couple of specialist areas. And I'm doing that. I'm not telling them about a model. I'm trying to get them to understand about systems, and I'm trying to get them to understand about how humans perform in systems, and that all models are useful, but all models have a bias. And there is no one model that, or I call it, there's no one ring that rules them all, which is which is what I think is trying to happen in the safety sciences at the moment. And you've had a few of those guests on your show, and you've seen that sort of feel. That's so there is no one way.
That there's one approach that's going to.
Yeah, there is no one approach.
Yeah. Okay. So are there any, you mentioned actually your website, and you mentioned a framework about keeping things human-centered. Are there any other books or websites or anything that you would recommend to listeners?
Yeah, well, look, yes. So Ohio State University are doing a lot of work in this space as well. So Professor David Woods, who with Honagel basically is the resilience engineering. So Professor Woods is doing a lot of work around that whole sort of human-centered side of AI. So there's some really good research happening over on that side. I'm not really seeing any actual books at the moment, because this is the problem. The moment you publish it, it's out of date.
And regulations are changing by the day, like discussions about how governments move so slowly and the technology moves so quickly. So you have to.
Yeah, well, even like, I think there was a paper that was published, I don't know if it was at a Griffith University, but there was a paper that was published, but that took 18 months to publish it. The models they're talking about had evolved 15 times since then. So the issues they were raising were no longer issues. And this is the thing, like I probably use, I don't know, half a dozen really good AI, what we call research-based tools. And I've just stopped asking myself what's new, okay, because they just keep evolving. And there's none of them, there's always something. There's always something. Like with my Tesla, I've now got an upgraded version of Grok that will give me insights as to Elon's life on a good day, whether I ask for it or not. Okay. Or I might ask it to give me a joke, and then it's going to laugh with me on the rest of the drive because it's learnt that I want to be humour. Okay. That didn't exist 3 months ago. I was with I was with a group of engineers the other week around some machinery safety. And, they were talking about, if people would only do better, the usual things the engineers talk about, don't get humans to break machines. And we're having a chat about e-stop designing e-stops. That was a really complex problem for them. So I had all the design standards in my tool. So I asked, in this case, I was using a product called Notebook LM from Google, and asked it to produce me a poster about e-stops for design. And we carried on talking, and I came back a few minutes later, it was ready, I put it up on the board, and the engineers just stood there, like they're just seeing the second coming. Okay. Because it had synthesized all this information that had come from the standards, not from the web, from the standards, and had produced it in a way that they could then engage with it and talk to workers about.
Okay, so things are always changing. So where does one go for discussion about this kind of thing?
It's at the moment we're devoid of that. That's the problem. And 90% of what's on LinkedIn is not great. Okay. Because it's someone pitching something.
Yes. Yeah. There's always a possibility that there's
someone selling something in that space. I mean, we are looking at the moment about whether we can create some form of interest group more around the application of AI to learn from operations, but it needs to be devoid of product. It actually needs to be, how do we apply AI? What can we learn, from it? That'd be really good. I mean, I'm doing a project at the moment where we are looking to capture something called tacit knowledge. So particularly in North America, you have a huge percentage of the workforce who are going to retire. There is information in the heads of those people that are not on paper. When they leave, that information goes with them. And they have a thing called green training green. So there is concern that harm rates are going to climb as a result, because the green people are coming in, only been trained in what the system said. The system was always brittle, but wasn't obviously brittle because the human was doing the bit in between. That human's not there anymore. So now the system is just going to snap because it's brittle, and then harm's going to happen. So we're looking at how we can use AI to capture the stories from workers around tacit knowledge and how to, beef up the system for training. And the way that we do that is we get them to explore how they do their job like they were training their son or their daughter, because we want that emotional context. Make sense? We don't want the linear bullshit. We want the emotional context, because the emotional bit is going to say, well, when we use this machine, you got to feel it on the left-hand side. If it vibrates harder than the right-hand side, then you need to lubricate it.
So listeners who are interested in getting in touch with you and any kind of interest groups or working groups, where can they find you on the web? And tell us about where they can find your books on the web as well.
Yeah, so obviously they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Also, our website is called hopcopilot.com is our website for the AI component. And we do offer a range of what we call free products, meaning that they're free to use and to explore. Okay, so you can get a bit of a taste for what it is. Also, all the books are on Amazon. So particularly our HOP Beginner Guide series, we're just about to release volume 7, which, funny enough, is called Asking Better Questions or Seeking Better Stories. So whole notion, difference between asking a question and getting a story. And in there are some stories about where AI has been applied to look at scale of our stories. I mean, we've got an organisation at the moment where we capture, I don't know, between 3,000 to 5,000 4D conversations a month.
That's a lot.
You can only do that. Well, you can only do that with AI. You can't do that any other way. Okay, it's just not possible.
So
And what they're learning is fascinating because they're not looking at individual stories. They're looking at where things are clustering.
So if people want to play around with the tools, they can go to that website.
Yeah, and register and try some tools. I mean, one of our free tools that works in Microsoft Copilot is a tool that takes an event summary or an accident, or whatever it is, a report, and produce a lovely little one-page of learning. And it applies just culture, and it does all these wonderful things automatically. And it gets rid of any blame language, just to demonstrate to people that you can take something that on paper might look very blamey, and how AI could take that context and produce it in a learning way, where you're not losing any of the effect, but the person reading it can see themselves in the story rather than reading the report and saying, well, either that person got it wrong or that person felt bad as a result. And they're just some simple examples of how to create that change.
Well, folks, that is our show for today. I hope it inspires your safety practice and discussion with your safety colleagues. Thank you for joining us, Brent.
Thank you, Mary.
My thanks to the Safety Labs team. And I'd like to remind listeners you can find us on LinkedIn for more discussion about this episode and other episodes. Just search for Safety Labs by Safety Products Global. Bye for now. This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Until next time, stay safe.